So this morning we're continuing our series of sea level rise briefings, and we're fortunate to have this month with us Dr. Tiffany Wise-West from the City of Santa Cruz. She's the city's Sustainability and Climate Action Manager. The city is currently doing a lot of really great work to address sea level rise, including with the support of the Commission's LCP grant program, and their work really illustrates many of the topics that we've been covering over the past 6 briefings, including the importance of sea level rise vulnerability analysis, adaptation planning, and public outreach and engagement. So with that, I will introduce Tiffany. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Madeline. Good morning, Commissioners. It is a pleasure to be here this morning to share with you our Resilient Coast Santa Cruz initiative. And I also want to thank you for the support that you've given to this initiative. Just want to start with sharing with you some of the vulnerabilities that, the coastal vulnerabilities that the city is facing. This map comes from our sea level rise vulnerability assessment that was conducted as part of our 2018 adaptation plan update. Here you'll see these blue shaded areas represent the combined coastal hazards of erosion, coastal storm flooding, and rising tide. And you'll notice that there are different shades of blue, particularly down on either side of the river and throughout the coastline. The darker the blue color is what we're projecting the inundation for these hazards closer to now, our baseline year. The lighter the colors represent what we're expecting further out. And really, there are no big surprises here for us. We already do experience very slight flooding down in our beach flats and lower ocean area, which will be exacerbated over time with climate change. And we are expecting some degree of erosion coming into on Westcliff Drive, our roadway. That, of course, with increased wave attack, will accelerate. We are projecting that in property and infrastructure assets alone, by the end of the century, we're facing $1 billion of assets that are exposed. That is excluding the value of recreation, tourism, ecosystem services, and so forth. So that number obviously greatly exceeds $1 billion. Also, we have, you can see here, a number of red dots. Those are our nearly over 24 access points that also are exposed and vulnerable. I think it is also worth mentioning that about 50% of our coastline is armored in some way, shape, or form, either riprap or seawalls that are in varying levels of condition. In addition to those access points, we have nearly 24 surf breaks that also obviously are very important to our local economy and to our culture in Santa Cruz. And through our 2018 adaptation plan update, we projected that after 2050, it is very likely that many of these surf breaks will be drowned out. We're adding in here our wildfire hazard zones that you can see in orange and red, and you see a number of different black patterns all across this map. Those represent sensitive habitat, both terrestrial and aquatic habitat, that overlay with both our fire hazard zones and our coastal hazards that I walked you through at the beginning. So habitat and ecosystems are also threatened by climate change and sea level rise. And then finally, people. We were really fortunate in 2017 to be connected up with Dr. Giuliano Khalil of through the American Geophysicists Union's Thriving Earth Exchange to conduct a novel social vulnerability to climate change assessment. What we did is, by census block group, we created a social vulnerability score that considers the incidence of poverty, elderly folks, crime, people that don't speak English well or at all, and incidence of disability. And based on those scores, we ranked those census block groups relative to one another to understand where is the greatest social vulnerability in our city, what are the drivers of that vulnerability, and how does that intersect with our hazard zones. And you can see that the blue, again, is shown here. And I'm pointing out with this arrow our vulnerable frontline community, which is the beach flats. The folks here have high social vulnerability that's driven largely by not speaking English and lower incomes. And I'm going to kind of hone in on this area where we've been especially focusing attention and outreach in just a moment. So we really are a community that's in need of a coastal vision. How are we going to manage these hazards over time? As I've already indicated, we need to address coastal access, tourism, and recreation, which are part of our economy. We have our iconic 2.7-mile West Cliff Drive, a transportation corridor, as well as our rail trail that are also in the line of fire. I've already demonstrated ecosystems and mentioned the coastal infrastructure. There's policy that needs to be updated, the sea level rise policies in our local coastal program. And of course, maintaining our unique sense of place and our cultural identity throughout this process is very important. And then I really want to introduce this concept of centering equity in this work, which I will share with you in just a moment we have been trying to do. So we're really, through these Resilient Coast projects, trying to create an inclusive conversation to really establish what is this long-term community vision. So the time horizon on these projects is out through the end of the century, really with the aim of developing a resilient and equitable coastline management plan. So with that, I'll introduce our Resilient Coast projects. These are two projects that we're kind of marketing together under the Resilient Coast Santa Cruz initiative banner. The first is the West Cliff Drive Adaptation and Management Plan. It is funded by Caltrans with a city match, primarily of labor. And then we also are in the process of developing the sea level rise policies and strategies for our local coastal program update to support beach and public access protection. And that's a mouthful, so we just call that our Beaches Project. So together, these projects have very similar scopes of work and are running along the same timeline. At this point in time, we are about halfway through these projects, and they will conclude at the end of the year. These projects are guided by an internal city team, a 17-person TAC, including Coastal Commission representatives on that technical advisory committee, and Coastal Commission has graciously funded for us a graduate student analyst position to assist with this project. And so the West Cliff Drive project will result in a management plan that will be approved by you, the Commission. And then the Beaches Project will result in the submission of an LCP amendment that, of course, will be approved by you, the Commission. The overarching conceptual framework that we are operationalizing these projects under is adaptation pathways, and I know you've heard about this concept before, with the thought here that we really are trying to get away from establishing explicit years or time horizons when we will do specific planning and implementation of projects. Instead, we will identify triggers that when those thresholds associated with those triggers are passed, that initiates the next phase of planning or implementation. We think this is a smart approach because it prevents us from locking in investments too early or too late. What you see on the screen here is a menu of trigger metrics that we are considering right now. You see there they range from temporal to environmental, structural, and fiscal. And this is not an all-inclusive list. There are others that can be considered as well. So in order to illustrate this concept, I do want to introduce Seabright Beach. Seabright Beach is 2/3 wider than it was before the west jetty of the harbor was installed. However, we know that through increased wave attack that the backshore cliffs will continue to erode, that eventually we'll lose some of this beach, and that we already have a disconnected multimodal infrastructure at the top of this path that needs some attention. So an adaptation pathway approach could look like this, and I'll walk you through it. I also want to mention, at this point in time, what I'm showing you is very conceptual. We are continually refining this adaptation pathways concept, and we'll be eventually assigning concrete trigger metrics. For example, beach width. What is that beach width that when it's met, when that beach has narrowed to that width, initiates a next step project? So walking you through this, we have on the far left-hand side, and I don't know how clear this is for you. It's not super clear on the large display on the left, but on the left-hand side, we have kind of the high-level categories of adaptation strategies. And on the far right-hand side, we have consequences and benefits associated with those strategies. And so if you start out in the upper left-hand corner with business as usual, which is minimal attention given to that beach, perhaps some kind of intervention that happens in the case of, say, the cliff eroding and crumbling away, we would typically respond in a responsive mode and not a reactive mode, a proactive mode rather. So under a business as usual scenario, according to this adaptation pathways concept, when a particular beach width is encountered, we would shift down to potentially a beach nourishment strategy. That strategy would continue until a certain degree of bluff failure would happen. That's the next trigger point, upon which we would transition potentially to a living shoreline concept. Already at Seabright Beach, we do have a vegetated dune that is under an ongoing restoration process, so we anticipate that could be some expansion of that living shoreline concept. You continue along living shorelines until we face some type of repetitive loss, and that could be to our access points or to our transportation infrastructure. At that point, we would likely need to shift to a managed retreat mode. So you see that that triggers considering a managed retreat policy. And we will continually need to revisit these strategies over time as these climate change impacts unfold. So this is how we are operationalizing adaptation pathways as a concept. We have this for 7 different stretches along our coastline. And we are presenting right now 3 concepts for short and long-term adaptations at each of those 7 locations. So again, this will continue to be refined through our subsequent deliverables, but I did want to share with you this concept. We have also been conducting extensive outreach as part of this project. We have identified over 57 potentially affected interest groups. We have a 350-person email list, folks that have explicitly reached out to us to stay apprised of this project. We have partnered with academia to expand our capacity in order to have this robust outreach program. Specifically, we have conducted 8 focus groups initially to understand coastal uses and values. We have conducted 950 Westcliff Drive surveys to understand uses and values that will also feed into our very detailed cost-benefit analysis that is coming up soon. Down in our beach flats and lower ocean frontline community, we have done 126 door-to-door interviews. Again, that's with a San Jose State University who is really helping us to sustain and make a long-term commitment to the beach flats area and incorporating them into the decision-making process on what will happen and how will we adapt those neighborhoods. We also have been meeting one-on-one with historically underrepresented groups, everyone from the NAACP to LGBTQ to people living with homelessness, and et cetera, et cetera. We had an amazing tribal meeting with tribal elders and native stewards and have been learning so much and really, you know, both understanding how do these different user groups use the coastline, what do we need to know to protect the coastline and to keep them engaged, but also building trust. That's been very important. The city has had a spotty history with some of these groups, particularly the Beach Flats area, in terms of trust. And so that's something that we know takes time, and we've been very dedicated to that. We've had our TAC and department head workshops, and really a very unique feature which the Coastal Commission grant has funded is the use of virtual reality, a very immersive tool that allows folks to see. We 3D modeled the coastline and built in our climate hazard layers that users can control. We have deployed that at our library, where we've had over 350 people come through and experience this virtual reality application. It will next be launching down at our Sanctuary Exploration Center at the base of the wharf after the coronavirus scare has passed. And eventually, it will be out in a mobile phone application so that folks don't have to come somewhere to view this virtual reality. It will also have a survey embedded into it. So again, we can collect data to assess awareness and preferences on some of these coastal adaptations. We just had a very successful open house last week, 105 people. For my line of work, that's really good, so I was really pleased with that. And got some feedback on preferences on short and long-term adaptations across these 7 stretches of our coastline. And we will be checking back with the underrepresented groups and having one more open house before we make our recommendations on these adaptations. So right now, we really are analyzing a narrow suite of adaptation pathways and short and long-term solutions, assessing the trade-offs that we'll be reflecting back to our community as we turn into our recommendations and our preferences. Just a couple slides just reflecting upon equity. I've already mentioned the fact that, you know, this kind of work takes time, and we have been learning and iterating, using what other folks have done in other jurisdictions and tools, equity screening tools that other jurisdictions and organizations have developed to really inform this piece. The city recently adopted a health and all policies framework, which the state has also adopted, which prioritizes equity, sustainability, and public health, gives us a little bit more, I think, authority to go forward with centering equity in our work. We also, again, have been leveraging academic partnerships to really continue sustained focus on these frontline communities, and again, have been meeting with the historically underrepresented groups to give them a voice in this process. You know, some of the things that we've been doing, we've been translating everything into Spanish. At our events, we do have food and try to have kids' activities. You know, a few challenges that we encounter, however, you know, it's very challenging for us to do stipends, which are best practices right now, to bring people to the table. Our internal processes do not allow for that, nor does some of our funding from our grant makers. And again, I just have to emphasize that the iteration has been really important. Through our health and all policies, we now are requiring that agenda reports must explicitly include language that highlights equity, sustainability, and public health. So really institutionalizing, centering equity in our work. And we also have training for our staff, commissioners, and other leadership on these concepts. We've learned that folks often conflate equity with fairness, that we treat everyone the same way. And I think everyone knows that we need to give folks a leg up on equity. The last thing that I will say is that the Beach Flats area has already articulated to us some short, medium, and long-term strategies that we are incorporating in our process. There are some other things happening in the Beach Flats that perhaps will allow us to address some of these short-term things now. For example, mold that's occurring because of high water tables. That doesn't necessarily have, you know, the nexus explicitly with the adaptation pathways that we're trying to do, but we're learning so much that needs to be addressed in this Beach Flats area. We have a lot of data that I won't go through at this time on the Beach Flats. You know, I should say, although I've mentioned that this community is challenged, it's a very vibrant part of our community. There are artists and gardeners, there are activists, and you know, it's really critical that these folks are involved in this process and have a voice. So how does it all fit together? You know, this is something maybe I'll leave you with and not go through in detail, but I did want to share with you how the outreach feeds in to all the different deliverables that happen. Everything from understanding coastal uses and values to establishing goals for these projects, which we did develop with the Coastal Commission, and then asked our community to prioritize those goals. We also, many of the data feed into the strategies that we are analyzing, and then taking a deep dive and looking in depth into their technical, legal feasibility, their alignment with the goals, and how that aligns with what our public wants to see. So these projects will result in the West Cliff Drive plan and the LCP amendment, which will be around policies. And the last thing I'll say is I'm always looking for creative and innovative ways to reach out to our community. And last year we were able to develop a card game with Rincon Consulting called Cards Against Catastrophe that we've been playing at pub nights throughout our community. It's a very easy way for folks to really quickly realize this is something we all need to have a conversation about, and that we need to come to consensus. Everyone wants something different, but we need to come to consensus as to what this plan and our vision is going to look like, because without a plan, we're all worse off. So this game really illustrates that concept, and I've just been very fortunate to be able to do these kinds of innovative things that are resonating with our community. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, thank you so much. I must say this is immensely impressive, and I think you should be the poster child for up and down the state, because these are exactly the issues that we are all dealing with, and some cities and other areas just aren't willing to take this on in this, I think, very scientific, very practical, very human, social way. So I appreciate it. Does anyone have any quick questions? We don't have a lot of time. Okay. Really, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Right. And as Don Schmitz is coming forward to talk to us, Don, you'll have 3 minutes. Just for staff, in the future, is it possible to get the presentations either online or in paper form? Because it's very hard to see the graphs and things.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
That would be great. And
Madam
also,
Chair,
it
we can
will
do that.
eventually be online, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
It'd be
thank
nice
you.
if it could be before.
Yes, we'll
Thank
do
you.
that.
All right, Don, you got 3 minutes.
Good morning, Commissioners. Don Schmitz on behalf of Smart Coast, California. We want to applaud this commission and Santa Cruz in regards to the very impressive work that is going on to address the issue of sea level rise. And one of the things that is just very obvious to anybody who is watching this is we're taking an approach which is much more nimble than what government is used to doing. We slap a plan down, we draw a line on a map and say this is what's going to be happening in the future. What Santa Cruz is doing here in regards to having triggers and observing over time what's going to happen, because we're all trying to predict the best that we can on what's going to happen in the future. But when you're talking about decades and decades, there's a lot of unknowns. It might happen faster, it might happen slower. Having those triggers in there, it's very fascinating to me personally. I sat on the dissertation committee for Dr. Claudia Avendano out of USC, who did a study for her PhD in Mexico dealing with sea level rise and having triggers for different land use regulations to be kicked in at that particular time. So Smart Coast California has been working with chapters now within its organization all the way from Chula Vista up to the Oregon border to constructively engage with the counties and the cities that are taking these vulnerability assessments and starting to work on their local coastal program amendments. It's a Herculean task, like I need to tell you that. But you've taken it head on, and the counties and the cities really seem to be stepping up to the plate as well. And one of the things that is imperative to us and that we're really starting to see is that we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach to this. And when you have a very complicated and nimble plan that has triggers and will adjust accordingly, then that's exactly what it is that we need to see. So we're working hand in hand with people in the trenches. It's not going to be even just about one county or about one city. The analysis is going to break down to particular sections of coastline and particular beaches and bluffs and open space areas and critical infrastructure and all those things. We know we've got a lot of work to do over the next couple of years, and we're looking forward to working with you on that. And I also want to report to you in summation that the California Association of Realtors and Smart Coast California is now working as a professional organization on what the disclosure forms will be. I had a great meeting with the executive director, Madeline, on this yesterday. We're going to be keeping them in the loop. We realize that that's an important thing that we need to bring to the table as well. So again, kudos to you. Thank you very much for you and your staff and the local jurisdictions on all the good hard work.
Thank you, Don. And I think, you know, to the extent that your clients are looking for a model of a way to approach the problem, I think Santa Cruz may be something that you'd want to share with them, because that was quite remarkable. Thank you so much.